This lesson, though, is one that I really have enjoyed cleaning up and turning into a sermon, and I really did want to share it with you. And I'll tell you at the end of this lesson why it made me think about a lot of people in our church family right now. And so I want to talk about this idea of David learning how to wait. That's what the songs were this morning. I'll point to these. I wrote them down so that I can remember. But it's what Tyler did in our song service. Our first song was Wait, Wait, Wait on the Lord. And so we sang about that. The second one was In His Time, waiting on God's time to be here. And then the last song that we just sang right now is Each Step I Take. No matter where I am and no matter what I'm doing, each step I take, I know that He will lead me. It's all been the theme. And then you know good and well what the invitation song is going to be. So it all goes together. We're talking about waiting on the Lord. The first thing that I want to do is just start with the positive for David. In 1 Samuel 16, I think this is where everything starts. And this slide that we're looking at right now is David up here. And it probably should not just be up here. Think of it like this. Think of it as an upward slope. And even if you want to go beyond the text that we're learning from and reading from today, this is the principle that we're going to be thinking about. Sometimes life goes like this. And everything is good. And we're up here. That's what we're talking about right now with David. The first thing, we won't read all of these verses. Let's just look at 1 Samuel chapter 16. And verse 13, there's the story about David being anointed as king, where Samuel came in and saw his brother. No, that's not the one. Another brother, no, that's not the one. Do you have any more sons? Yeah, but he's not important enough to be here. He's out taking care of the sheep. And David comes in and, to everybody's surprise, is anointed the next king of Israel. In verse 13, Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. I don't know how old David was when this happened. I did a ChatGPT and a Google search, and I looked through all of the commentaries and study Bibles, and the best that I think I can say, that at least everybody agrees on, is that he was a young man. That means a lot of things to a lot of people. But let's say a young man. And I don't know about you, but if I take a young man and anoint you and say, you are the next king of our nation, first of all, you might say, what? But I can almost promise you that any young man in that situation is going to blow up like this. I'm the king. I mean, it would be hard not to be filled with that kind of confidence / arrogance, pride, whatever it might be. At some point, David gets called into Saul's service. Chapter 16. Let's read verses 21 through 23. David came to Saul and entered his service, and Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, let David remain in my service, for he has found favor in my sight. And whenever the harmful spirit from God was upon Saul, David took the lyre and played it with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the harmful spirit departed from him. So you got a young man who knows that he is going to be the next king, and he gets called to be the king of the land's personal, what do you call that? What do you call that thing? The pet that walks around with you and calms you down whenever you need help. Service animal, whatever. Like, this is David. And you can imagine another kind of situation. This is what I thought of with David in the presence of the king. You know, I don't know if you saw this on the internet or not, but in the Paralympics that recently happened, there is a girl who was in the Olympics who is a Christian. She's a swimmer. And This is one of those things that probably, like, you would not probably know this unless I've told you in the past, but there are some folks who watch our services regularly and will send Facebook message and comment about classes and things. Like, if there's a question that happens in class, he'll send a comment in class, and I'll read it and do that afterwards. And those people are the in-laws of this girl who was an Olympic swimmer. And Luke and Sarah Heisley know this girl. And I think about it because Sarah was talking about it one day, and it's like, who in this room, like, knows somebody competing in the Olympics? That's cool. That's really cool to be like, hey, we're friends with that person. And you take that mindset of just somebody competing in the Olympics that you could see on TV, and you put yourself in David's shoes, and you say, I live in the king's house, and I walk around with him, and I help him, and he loves me, and I'm favored by him. And so here's David. Put yourself in a young man's shoes. Here's David on this track. I want you to feel this part. It's really important that you feel it. In chapter 17, he defeats Goliath. If that wouldn't blow a young man's head up, no other warriors in the camp were willing to do it, and David kills him, and don't you know he walked back like this? I just took care of that. David and Jonathan, chapter 18 and verses 1 through 4. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. So on top of everything else that we've talked about, David's best friend is the king's son. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And look at what the king's firstborn son does with David. Jonathan stripped himself of his robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And so here is the firstborn son of the king, who is the next in line to be king. And Jonathan says to David, all of this stuff, me, the next in line to be king, I'm going to give it to you. And Saul, we won't read this passage, but Saul recognized exactly what this was and criticized his own son and said, you are giving your position away to another person. Add it to the list of things that David is living in right now. Chapter 18 and verses 5 through 7. This is David. This is the song. I sing the song wrong because it irritates my kids. And every time I do, they go, Dad. But this is David's life. All I do is win, win, win all the time. And the kids go, no. But that's David. Verse 5. David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. And as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistines, the women came out. Okay, you're a young man, and now all of the girls are flocking to you. The women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands, David his 10,000s. So you're David in this spot, and you're feeling real good about things. He has been anointed king. Everything is going as well as it possibly can go. And you can almost see the next steps in life. That's where you have to be to understand what happens next. I'm going to put the next 3 slides up in 3 stages. And the moral of this story is everything collapses and falls apart and completely goes to pot for David. It's not like he just has a hard time. He is at the very, very top, and he's about to go in steps all the way down to the very, very bottom of where you could possibly be. First of all, in chapter 18 and verses 8 and 9, this could be I put this one as escalation and David was unaware. Like maybe, well, let's read it. Chapter 8 and verses 8 and 9. Saul was very angry at this saying, and it displeased him, and he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands, and what more can he have but the kingdom? Saul is getting jealous. Listen, you don't want the most powerful man in the land to be jealous of you. I think most of us can understand that. Saul eyed David from that day on. That's verse 9. In verses 10 and 11, the next day a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre. And he did this day by day. Saul had a spear in his hand. That escalated pretty quick. And Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. Now check this out. But David evaded him twice. And this is the thing. David was called into Saul's court in order to deal with Saul in these kind of moments. And so I'm putting this in a David unaware situation because I wonder if everybody would have been like, oh, that's Saul. He's such a silly goose. Every once in a while, he just throws his spear at people, and it's like, it seems to be a thing. And so maybe David is not completely understanding how bad this situation is right now, but it is. It is really bad right now for him. So the next thing that you see happening is that Saul does not want to get his own hands dirty with this. He wants somebody else to take care of the problem for him. And again, this is one of those, you don't see it right away, but you can see it as we go. Chapter 18 and verses 12 and 13, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of the 1,000. And he went out and came before the people. And so Saul says, all right, David, your job is not to calm me down in the royal court anymore. You're going to go to war. And you're going to be out there and you're going to fight. In verses 17 through 19, it becomes a little more apparent. Saul said to David, here is my elder daughter Merab. I give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. Saul is actively trying to have David killed. That's you. Just a second ago, you were up here at the very top of the mountain. Now the most powerful man in the land is trying to have you killed. That's not a fun place to be, I don't imagine. And there's something else that goes along with this story that is just really weird. He said, hey, here's my oldest daughter. You can marry her. And David's a humble person in verse 18. Who am I and who are my relatives, my father's clans in Israel, that I should be the son-in-law to the king? But at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel, another person, for a wife instead. And so you're David, all right, I'm going to marry this girl. And then Saul says, psych, she's going over here now. It's the roller coaster. That's what I want you to feel, that you need to see on this. And I think you'll see it. I think you'll feel it later. David eventually gets to marry Michal, Saul's other daughter. Look at chapter 18 and verse 27. David arose and went along with his men and killed 200 of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal for a wife. So he finally gets to marry the king's daughter. There's another weird part of this story. I always wonder how that looked. Like, how do you make that? Is it just a figurative thing? Saul, I killed 100 Philistines. Or did he make it into a necklace? I don't know how did this go? I don't know what the answer to this question is, but it's weird. But here's David. And Michal is going to be working, Saul intends for Michal to be working against him also. And then this is where it just gets nasty. Like there's no way out of this. Verse 1, 19:1. Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. So now it's not, I'm trying to have you killed in a way that doesn't look like anybody did this. Now he's gathering his men together and saying, we're going to kill David. And you can go through these different stories. He throws his spear at David again in verses 8 and 10, tries to kill him. In chapter 19, in verses 11 through 17, this is the story. Saul has sent his men in an ambush. They're waiting for David, and they're going to kill him. This is it for him. But Michal, Saul's daughter, hears about this and lowers him down through a window, and David escapes. I don't know how all of this played out and why it was the way that it was, but I'm thinking if I'm David at this point, I'm probably getting out of town. But he doesn't. He tries to kill him, and God intervenes. There's the story in verses 18 through 24 with all of the weird prophets and this thing that happens. But the moral of the story is, chapter 20 and verse 1, David finally reaches a spot. Chapter 20 and verse 1, and this is the spot. This verse is the spot that I want you to feel. Everything up to this place in this lesson has been to understand David in this verse, in this spot. 20 and verse 1. David fled from Naioth and Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, what have I done? What is my guilt? What is my sin before your father that he seeks my life? And that's the place where I'm assuming, we'll talk about this in just a second, but I'm assuming that at least a lot of you can probably start to feel this when you're up here and then life brings you down here, and your response is just to throw up your hands and say, what do you want from me? What have I done? Why are we even doing this right now? It's not a fun place to be. If you've ever been there, David has talked about this in other places. In Psalm 7, I'm not going to read this psalm, but in Psalm 7, David has this attitude. He has it in our text, and he has it in Psalm 7, where David's like, listen, if I've done something wrong, then put me to death. Seriously. But I haven't done anything wrong. Why am I having to do all of these next things that I'm going to have to do? And this is what I would like for you to do. Right now, I'm at 1 Samuel 20. Just do this. Just flip over to 2 Samuel 5, one page at a time. Look at your headings. David's running for his life. People are trying to kill him. He has an opportunity to kill Saul, but he doesn't. He could have ended this, but he's a good man. He doesn't do it. And I'm still flipping. Now David's running from the Philistines. I'm still flipping. And I'm going to come all the way to 2 Samuel chapter 5, where David is finally anointed as king. And if you look at chapter 5 and verse 4, it says David was 30 years old when he began to reign. So he's gone from being a young man up here. I can't give you a timeline. I don't know what the dates are. A young man up here to everything completely falling apart. In my mind, everything completely falling apart happens through his 20s. This is not a 5-minute deal either. And it doesn't all come together and everything start moving finally in the right direction until he's 30 years old, when he's anointed as the king of Israel. That's a long time to walk through the mud. All the way through your 20s. When you thought everything was cool and awesome, that's a long time to be in the pit. I'm going to throw this next slide up here as the main point, but then I want to talk about some different things that go along with this. Our job in this life is to find peace in the Lord and to learn to wait for Him. And maybe it's just words on a screen to you until you've been in the pit like David was. But what I would ask and want you to at least think about for a couple of minutes is that this is almost the exact pattern that all of God's people have had to go through. There's Abraham. And God says to Abraham, okay, Abraham, you are here with your family living in Ur, like the metropolitan hub of the world at the time. And this is what I want you to do. I want you to leave and go to a land that I'm promising you. Where is it? I'll show you when you get there. And he gets there. Okay, God, I'm here. And God says, I'm going to give it to you, but not while you're alive. Your descendants are going to get it. And also, you're going to have a son. Yes! I'm going to have a child. But first, we're going to wait until it seems impossible for you. And then there's the story of Moses. 40 years in Pharaoh's house. And then he leaves, and he goes 40 years into the wilderness to work as a shepherd. He's 80 years old by the time God calls him and says, I have a plan for you. Go and do something. That's a long time to wait. That's a long time to work in the wilderness when you started as a prince of Egypt, and now you've been a shepherd in the wilderness for the next 40 years. 80 years old is a long time to wait. Joseph's road was a long one. Favorite son, slave in Egypt. Top of the pile, bottom of the pile. Top of the pile again. This idea of God saying to his people, you are going to have to learn to find peace while you wait for me. It's not my time yet. You have to wait for my time. And while you're waiting, you have to learn to find peace. These are the songs that we sang. And I love in that first song that Tyler did for us this morning, I love the pause. Wait, quiet. Wait, quiet. Wait on the Lord. Be strong and courageous. That's one of those things like you have no choice because it's not a fun place to be. Or the song that we sang, In His Time. I will wait for God's time. I know that my illustrations don't even hold a candle to your alls, some of your alls. I've told you this story a couple different times, but when I think about this story, this is what I think about. I was not like most college kids. I assume it's most college kids, at least it seems like most college kids. I went to school because I needed to learn something. I wanted to be a preacher, but I didn't know anything about the Bible, and I needed to learn. I had to. And so I went with a mission, and I was laser focused on that mission for 4 years. This is what I was going to do. And we sacrificed a lot to do that. And I finished school. I get my first preaching job. And Becky will tell you this. There were some nights in Memphis when we were there when we would lay down and I would look over at Becky and I would just say, I am so happy right now. Everything just felt like we are finally here. And then we got a call from the insurance company one day, and we can't afford insurance anymore. And in a couple of days, it's over. We move. It's a long story. You don't need to know all the details, but we moved back to Kansas City. I don't have a job. And that time, I did things. I did all kinds of things. I remember one time freezing, outside, freezing. We had to break up the frozen ground to dig this ditch for a pipe. And it was wet, and I was cold, and I'm digging through frozen ground. And I remember that point where I stopped, and I thought to myself, how did this happen? Like we did what we wanted to do. And now I'm here. And then those years of being a cop was not because that's what I wanted to do. It's because that's who was hiring. And they were not fun years for us. And so you take a 4-year gap there of everything is exactly what I thought it was going to be to everything has completely fallen apart for 4 years. That's a long time for everything to... I went into some dark places in those 4 years. And I tell you this, like I talk about this sometimes. I don't think that my soul... I would not have made it as a Christian if I stayed in that spot. I was not doing well. Wait. Learn to find peace while you wait. I went through and sat just quietly thinking about some of this. One of the things that I'm shocked by an awful lot is I will ask you all, how's work going? Do you like your job? What's going on? I want to know what you're doing. How's work going? I think the universal response is, I work because I have to work. Some of our marriages have not really turned out the way that they thought they might. Some of us have raised kids and that didn't really go the way that we thought it was going to go. I don't ever like to talk about this because I feel like I'm rubbing salt in the wound. I'm not trying to rub salt in the wound. I'm trying to acknowledge. I know that there are a lot of you here who want to be married, who are not. With you in this, like, we're in the waiting dip right now. I think about Nick and Lena sitting in the hospital. And sorry to name names. Sorry, not sorry, but I think about Adam and Erica a lot. And not being where you expected to be, but being here instead. The point of all of these stories and the lesson that we find from David that we're talking about right now is that when we're in the bad spot in life that we did not imagine that we would be in, and we certainly don't want to be, our job is to find peace while we wait for the Lord. I can't tell you anything more than that. In fact, I'm going to tell you that, and I'm going to tell you and tell you and tell you and tell you. You can write these down if you want. You don't need to turn to them. I'm going to read all of these passages because I want you to hear that this is not a one-time message from God. This is not like God gave us one example or said it one time. Hey, sometimes things are going to stink and you're just going to have to wait for me. These are exact words that he said like a drum over and over and over again. I'm just going to read them. There's 9 of them, I think. I'm just going to read them all. Listen. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not yourself over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil devices. What about that guy over there? He's not even a Christian. He doesn't care, and his life is going good. And God says, don't worry about that guy. You wait for the Lord. For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is from him. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits. In his word I hope, my soul waits for the Lord more than a watchman for the morning. They who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. I'm at the Lamentations passage right now. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the Lord, the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. Habakkuk. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. And then Romans 8. If we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. So these are only a handful of the passages. That is a message all through the scriptures about something that I think about you guys on the front row up here, like you kids. I wish I didn't have to. It brings me no joy to talk about this, but the idea is, hey, this is life. This is what happens, and this is what we're supposed to do when it happens. To wait patiently for the Lord. If you're here this morning, I have one thing to say to you, and that is that your job is to wait for God, but don't you make God wait for you. If you know what you need to do in order to be a Christian, and you know that he is sitting on his throne just waiting for you to come home like the prodigal son, today can be the day that we do that. Let us know as we stand and sing the invitation song.